Our collective outrage must translate into action.
I will always be committed to a future where women and girls and LGBTQ people can live and work knowing that they are safe.
SHRM partners with the ILO to see that organizations have the tools and resources they need to safeguard employees and promote healthy workplace cultures.
We must continue this important work and create workspaces that are free from violence and harassment.
I am hungry for change. We need to come together collectively to stop gender-based violence now.
We look forward to supporting additional efforts in partnership with unions, civil society, businesses, multilateral partners such as the International Labor Organization, and all of you to ensure everyone in the world enjoys safe and respectful workplaces.
Welcome, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and colleagues. Welcome to the roundtable discussion sponsored by the International Labor Organization's Office for the United States and Canada in collaboration with the Department of Labor's Women's Bureau, Uniting to End Gender-Based Violence and Harassment, the Impact of Worker-Led Education and Awareness session will begin. I am Kevin Cassidy. I'm the director of the ILO office here in the United States, and it is my great honor and privilege to be working with such amazing advocates on this issue. This is the fourth in a series of discussions to promote greater awareness and action based on the ILO Convention 190. This is a groundbreaking, first ever international labor standard addressing violence and harassment in the world of work, including gender-based violence and harassment. Recordings for all of these webinars are available on ilo.org/Washington. Just very briefly, the International Labor Organization's Convention 190 was adopted unanimously by the 187 members, including governments, workers, and employers organizations in June 2019. After an intensive campaign by unions, this really had a worldwide appeal. Currently, 22 countries have ratified. We are looking to those who are representing governments today to please join us in this campaign. You'll hear a lot about C-190, and I want to emphasize some bedrock principles. Gender-based violence and harassment disproportionately affects women and girls. Addressing GBVH requires an inclusive, integrated, gender-responsive approach that goes to the heart of underlying causes and risk factors, and recognition of gender stereotypes, intersecting forms of discrimination, and unequal gender-based power relationships. Convention 190 calls for governments and workers and employers organizations to address GBVH on multiple fronts. Our first session back in October of last year, which many of you have attended and which is available on our landing page, as I mentioned, ilo.org/Washington, is focused on legislative efforts by workers and their allies at the state and local levels. Today's discussion will focus on the importance of worker-led education and awareness. We will hear today about how these efforts to build power and create real change is having an impact around the world and at local levels. Our fantastic panel will be in dialogue with each other about the work on education and awareness, and you'll hear some really specific aspects of what is happening on the ground and hopefully some ideas that you can adopt in your own environments and cities. We are also delighted to have our moderator today is Donna Lewan-Leger. She is quite a renowned journalist, but just very quickly is that Donna is the president and founder of DC Media Strategies and is a senior advisor to Stanton Communications. Donna previously served as the managing editor of USA Today and has worked as a reporter covering breaking news, national and international crime, terrorism, and disasters. Donna will introduce our panelists in just a few minutes, but right now it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to Chitty King. Chitty is a colleague who is working in Geneva at the ILO and currently serves as the branch chief for gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. Before serving in that role, Chitty was the head of the International Labor Unions Confederation Equality Department, where she was a tireless leader in the development and adoption of C-190. At this time, I'd like to turn over the floor to Chitty. Chitty, the floor is yours.
And I apologize, Kevin. Just a quick housekeeping announcement for everybody who's listening. Today's session will include some Spanish, and there will not be any way to hear interpretation into English unless you have selected your channel accordingly in Zoom. To do so on a computer, locate the globe icon along the bottom of your screen and then select English. If you're on a mobile device, look for the three dots at the corner of your screen, then select language interpretation and be sure to click done at top right. And we ask that nobody mute the original audio. I will now make this announcement in Spanish. Buenas tardes, bienvenidos. Si no han podido escuchar hasta ahora la interpretación al español, les pedimos por favor en una computadora buscar el icono del globo terráqueo, seleccionar español. Luego, en un dispositivo móvil, si pueden por favor localizar los 3 puntos donde dice more o más, luego interpretación del idioma, luego seleccionan español y arriba a la derecha seleccionan done o finalizado y les pedimos por favor no seleccionar silenciar audio original. Thank you very much. Back to the program.
Thank you very much, and apologies for not allowing the details to be read. At this time, Chidi, if you would take the floor, please.
Sure, thank you very much, Kevin, and greetings, everyone. Buenos tardes, buenos días, todas y todos. Really a pleasure to join you today. And actually, this salon is taking place just in the same week as the ILO published what we believe is quite a groundbreaking and revealing survey, which attempts to lift the veil on the prevalence of violence and harassment in the world of work. So it was the first ever attempt to capture the prevalence of this phenomenon. And I think the survey really confirms many of the issues that our distinguished panel of speakers are going to be talking to us about today. What are some of the key findings that this survey confirms? Well, it confirms, unfortunately, what we all know, that violence and harassment is indeed a serious problem in our world of work, that 1 in 5 people in employment experience some form of physical, psychological, or sexual violence and harassment at work. It confirms that psychological violence and harassment appears to be the most prevalent, certainly of those who participated in the survey, and that there are some gender differences in experiences of violence and harassment. So that whilst men were perhaps more likely to have experienced physical violence and harassment, women were more likely to have experienced both psychological and sexual violence and harassment. And in fact, women were significantly more likely to have experienced some form of sexual violence and harassment. The survey also confirmed that discrimination plays a key role in people's experiences of violence and harassment. So young people were more likely to have experienced this. Migrant women also were more likely to have experienced violence and harassment. And it really does confirm what the convention itself says, that multiple and intersecting discrimination are often root causes, underlying root causes of violence and harassment, and of course points to the need to tackle discrimination in order to effectively address violence and harassment. It also confirms the presence of intersectionality in people's experiences of violence and harassment, so that different identities, of course, do intersect to compound discrimination and to compound experiences of violence and harassment. And in the time that I have left, I think I just want to point to one of, I think, the very revealing, or many revealing aspects of this survey, which is confirming again what I think most of us were aware of, that people are reluctant to talk about their experiences of violence and harassment. So less than half of those who responded to the survey had actually reported their experience of violence and harassment to someone, and they were least likely to have reported this to their employer or indeed to their trade union, which again points to the necessity for the work that you are all doing to raise awareness, to build workers' power on this issue in order to really address effectively the scourge of violence and harassment, both in terms of preventative measures but also in terms of ensuring that those who are subjected to violence and harassment have sound access to remedy. And again, this is a key role that workers' organizations can play, encouraging people to speak up about the experiences of violence and harassment. So working with employers as well to ensure that trusted procedures are in place that would encourage that sort of reporting. So let me stop there because I think I'm already at the end of my time, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from the panelists that you have here today. Thanks.
Great. Chidi, thank you so much. We will make sure that the link is on the landing page. So for those listening today, please view that landing page. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Donna. Donna, I've already given the introduction, but a great colleague, friend, mentor to me personally. I really appreciate everything you've done to help us really amplify this message and really reach out to many people. So Donna, please take over. It is your floor.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Chidi, for your really wise words there. We're so appreciative. And thank you to all of you. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this incredibly important issue and for joining us throughout the series. We're really grateful that you're all paying attention and here with us today. I do want to mention that at the end of our discussion, we will have time for a Q&A. You do have a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you are on Zoom. If you think of a question while we're having the panel discussion, feel free to put it in there as you think of it. We'll sort through them at the end. We will be getting to questions at about 3:15 if you're on East Coast time. If you're not on East Coast time, you can figure it out. So anyway, let me begin with just a little bit of an introduction. Gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work is a barrier to achieving gender equity and safe work for everyone. All of the people we have here on the screen today are leaders in addressing and preventing gender-based violence and harassment in their own workplaces. And it really speaks to the importance of a grassroots effort. Their efforts today include engaging and advocating for effective education about the scope of gender-based violence and harassment, as well as incidents and impacts on workers. So just to review, the International Labor Organization Convention 190, adopted in 2019 by the UN and now ratified by 22 countries around the world, is the first global labor standard to seek to prevent and address all forms of violence and harassment in the world of work. It specifically addresses gender-based violence and harassment and requires governments, employers, and workers to come together to create gender-centered education and awareness programming. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists with just sort of a one sentence introduction, because we really want to get into this discussion. But if you want to know more about our panelists, please go to the landing page and you can see that. I encourage you to do that because you will find out some really interesting things about, you know, Taekwondo and other things that our panelists have done that I may not get to mention. But I want to start by introducing Karen Dove. She's the executive director of ANEW, a 40-year-old nonprofit with a mission to improve people's lives by providing quality training, employment navigation, and supportive services leading to successful family wage careers. Karen, can you give everyone a wave? All right, great. Veronica Giron is a janitorial worker, union leader, and educator who leads Ya Basta. She's a mother of two, and she came to the United States from El Salvador 18 years ago. Veronica, can you give everyone a wave? Excellent, thank you. Joining us next is Desiree Wood, founder and president of Real Women in Trucking and Truckers Emergency Assistance Responders. Desiree is a Mexican-American woman from California with 2 children and 6 grandchildren. She began writing about her experiences as a single female entering trucking in 2008 on Ask the Trucker. Her story, A Day in the Life of a Lady Trucker, became the basis of an investigative reporting series by Dan Rather into truck driver training. So Desiree, if you could give us a wave. Thank you. And then finally, we have Chantel Cousineau, and Chantel is an actor and a certified intimacy coordinator for SAG-AFTRA. That's the actors union. And she has been in more than 100 commercials, so you may recognize her face. And before becoming an intimacy advisor and a certified intimacy coordinator for SAG-AFTRA. So let's get started with some of the questions for our first speaker. And folks, if you are having trouble seeing all the panelists, you may want to put yourself on gallery view, and then you can see all the panelists. So to get us started, I'd love to hear from each of you about how and why you began trying to raise awareness about gender-based violence and harassment in your work among the workers, among government, and among other stakeholders. In the context of ILO C-190, we'd be particularly interested in hearing how you began organizing with other workers and some allies. And who would like to go? Who would like to go first? I think Chantal.
Yes, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever everyone is. I'm Chantal Cousineau, and I first got involved with advocacy on this issue in 2017. So it was certain women were coming forward about experiences they'd had in the film industry, now known as the Me Too movement. And at the time, I thought, I actually had an experience as well. So if we're just bringing up names, I came forward and spoke with the LA Times about a director, an employer that had sexually harassed me. And I knew that article would spotlight certain things, certain weaknesses in our industry. And so I approached the union, SAG-AFTRA, to discuss this opportunity for change and for, shifting radically the way that we protect performers on set. And they met the moment so gracefully and aggressively. And we tackled many issues with regards to safety right off the bat. And then the article came out and 400 women came forward about the same person. So that just, accelerated everybody's, commitment to changing, the way things happen in the workspace for performers, using, the resources at the union, growing those resources, seeking out local and national leadership support for legislative reform, and then, just waking up to this acknowledgement that there is an issue here and that there's an opportunity for change. And so that's what brought me to this conversation, and the conversation just keeps growing. And I'm just interested to meet all of these amazing women and see how we can all work together and just grow these solutions.
All right. Well, Desiree, let me turn to you because, working together, that's always a challenge, especially if you are a trucker in isolation. So tell me a little bit about how you came to do what you do.
Well, I came to do it as a driver myself, entering the industry, not familiar with the trucking industry, and learning that the only way to learn to drive a truck is to get in one with somebody alone and be isolated. And in particular, have to live and work inside the truck together for weeks at a time, unsupervised, going to truck stops to take showers, changing in there. And in that environment with no supervision, you're sort of at the mercy of the other person. You're not introduced to human resources department personnel. You are not given you're given so much paper before you're sent off that you're so overwhelmed with everything you're learning that it doesn't even occur to you that something can happen. So what I learned was that I did have a firsthand experience, not with a sexual assault, but with a violent incident. And as soon as I reported it using their policies and procedures, there was a target on my back, not on the perpetrator. And in talking to other women and getting to know women at different companies, finding out that this was actually a pattern in practice throughout the industry to chase the woman away and let the guy keep working or the perpetrator keep working. And that's why I took to social media, and I just felt like there was just so much fear of speaking out that I just felt like if I say something, more people will come forward. And that's kind of how it got started.
Okay, thank you. Veronica, tell me a little bit about what motivated you to begin working in this space and how you even became aware of it.
Sí. Bueno, buenos días a todos, sí me escuchan, ¿verdad? Pues empezamos en el 2015, ¿verdad? Lo que nos motivó es ver primero un documental que se llama Rape on the Night Shift, donde está hablando de mujeres janitor que fueron acosadas y que eran de la industria de los janitor. Y vimos que muchas de esas compañías a las que ellas trabajaban pertenecían a nuestro sindicato. Entonces dijimos, esto es algo que está ocurriendo, esto es real, ¿verdad? Muchas personas creen que las janitor o las trabajadoras de limpieza que trabajamos en los edificios donde hay clientes que tienen mucho dinero, a lo mejor no podría pasar eso, pero pasa, ¿verdad? La vulnerabilidad que tenemos de trabajar de noche, de trabajar solas, nos hace, ¿verdad?, ser víctimas de acosadores, víctimas del abuso de poder, víctimas de supervisores que sienten que tienen el poder para decidir si una persona trabaja o no trabaja en la industria de limpieza. Entonces ahí es donde viene nuestra lucha, ¿no? Al conocer que hemos sido utilizadas muchas veces, ¿verdad? Por necesidad, por decir que tengo necesidad de un trabajo, tengo que aguantar, ¿verdad? Tengo que aguantar los manoseos de un supervisor, aguantar que él me esté invitando a salir, ¿verdad? Por necesidad, que tengo a lo mejor hijos, porque tengo una familia por mantener. Entonces, ese problema al ver ese documental vimos, esa es una realidad que vive la industria de limpieza y es hora de hacer algo. Tenemos que parar. Por eso nuestra campaña se llama Ya Basta, ¿verdad? Ya basta con el acoso, ya basta con el abuso. Y somos mujeres empoderadas ahora que no solo sabemos sobre las leyes, ¿verdad?, que protegen a un trabajador, a un janitor, acerca del acoso sexual, sino que también estamos tratando de cambiar esa cultura de que se ha normalizado tanto, de que alguien abusa de una mujer y que la mujer se queda callada por temor, ¿verdad? Se ha normalizado tanto, ¿verdad? Que nosotros estamos educando no solo a las mujeres para empoderarlas, sino también diciéndole a esas personas, lo que tú estás haciendo es ilegal. Entonces, ¿cómo lo hacemos? A través de la educación. Porque quieras o no, venimos de unas culturas donde lo vemos tan normal el decir un piropo a una persona y que la otra persona lo tiene que recibir, ¿verdad? Así porque sí. No debería ser. No, si yo me siento incómoda, si yo no quiero que me hagan eso, si yo no quiero que me toquen o no me miren de una forma que no quiero que lo hagan, ¿verdad? Tengo derecho a decir no, que no lo hagan. Y hay leyes que están protegiendo eso. Nosotros hemos luchado por 2 leyes que nos han ayudado también a poder no solo decir que una compañía o un empleador debe hacer o debe proteger a los trabajadores, sino cómo debe hacerlo. Y eso nosotros lo hemos hecho como trabajadoras. Hemos puesto esas soluciones sobre la mesa y ellos han leído, ¿verdad? Y ahora son parte de nosotros. Toda una comunidad de mujeres janitor que ahora pertenecen al Centro Ya Basta, somos las personas que estamos diciendo qué soluciones necesitamos en el lugar de trabajo, ¿verdad? ¿Qué son las condiciones que necesitamos en ese lugar de trabajo? Así que ha sido una lucha muy grande desde el 2015 hasta ahora, ¿verdad? 2022, donde tenemos muchas mujeres que se han graduado de una maestría conociendo sus derechos, hablando de discriminación, hablando de trauma informado, de cómo podemos ayudar a más mujeres en la industria para que conozcan sus derechos, para que puedan defenderse, pero que también puedan cambiar esa cultura tóxica que existe dentro de nuestra industria. Así que, y vamos a seguir trabajando. Yo estoy muy orgullosa de escuchar todas sus historias y ver de que despertamos. Definitivamente, creo que las mujeres hemos despertado para decir ya basta.
Thank you, Veronica. Excellent. So Karen, let me turn to you. Tell me a little bit about what your approach has been.
Absolutely. So Anu works mainly in the construction industry, which, as you probably know, is predominantly white male and not particularly inclusive to other groups or individuals. And so when I came into Anu 7 years ago, we train women to get into the industry. And so we would train them to get into the industry. They would get into these great apprenticeships and great family wage jobs. And then they would come back and tell us what was happening on the job sites and the behaviors that they were experiencing literally on a daily basis. And Veronica, what you said was so true about we've created this culture of just put your head down and work, right? Because we want our paycheck. We need to take care of our families. We need that check at the end of the day. So instead of saying anything, we just put our head down and let that behavior happen. Because if we don't, we will be targeted, we will be retaliated against. There will be negative consequences likely that will come out of speaking up. And so Anu created a program called Rise Up, Respect, Inclusion, Safety, and Equity in the Construction Trades. And it's a respectful workplace campaign designed to create a workforce that's more inclusive, workplace that's more inclusive to all people. The issue that's happening in the construction industry is while it has been predominantly white male, the industry is changing and changing rapidly. We don't have the average age of somebody in the industry is 53 years old. We're facing a huge shortage of workers because we've told young people that college is the pathway to success and that these are less than jobs. And so we have a huge need for these jobs, and these jobs are family wage jobs. And so there's been a lot of focus on ensuring that women, people of color, immigrants have opportunities in the construction industry. And so we have to start addressing the culture issue and the harassment, hazing, bullying that's happening and stop that behavior so that we can attract the workforce so that we can get the work done, or we'll all be in trouble because we won't have access to the water and the plumbing and all these other things that we need and are used to. It's going to be an issue if we don't start changing the narrative and ensuring that people are welcomed into the industry.
So the one commonality that I am hearing from all of you is that workers are deeply involved in the work that you are doing, raising awareness and getting them effectively involved in these issues and in this advocacy and in this training. Tell me a little bit about how you've done that, particularly how do you get folks who are just in a culture of keeping their head down and just want to get the job done? How do you get workers to buy into this? And why do you think it is important for workers to buy into this?
Well, I'll start first on this question. So we knew that if we went into this in an adversarial position, that it was not going to be well received. And so we did a lot of work with industry partners, with trades workers, to establish what the values are in the construction industry, and then to tie this work back to the values. So it has to be culturally relevant within the industry. And in the construction industry, retention of workers is critical. Productivity, obviously, is a huge value, and safety has been a value for a long time. We know that if workers are distracted, if they're being harassed, they're not going to stay. They're going to be distracted. That's when accidents happen. They're not going to be focused on their work, and there's a huge loss of productivity. So our focus was to get them to lean in because we are basing it on what they already value and showing them that this type of program, this type of behavior will actually increase their productivity, increase their safety, and ensure that their work sites, everybody goes home safe and their work sites are more inclusive. And at the end of the day, they'll make more money, which we all know is what the construction companies want to do. So that's how we tied it back to get people to lean into this work instead of going in as an adversary saying, you guys are all horrible, you need to change. We really focused it on what was important to the industry.
Desiree, it looks like you want to say something.
Well, I just love what Karen just said, because I'm in a very adversarial industry. And it's not just the men, it is women that work in the offices that are it's very us against them. Like, you're a driver and your opinion doesn't matter, and keep your head down and don't rock the boat, because you shouldn't bite the hand that feeds you. So we have yet to be able to we just had a first meeting for an advisory board. And I was really proud of the women who were able to speak, who are workers for the first time, to this federal agency, and to women in other higher level sectors who have kept them down and silenced, that they were be able to say for the first time, no, you are not telling me what's happening to me. I'm telling you what's happening to me, and we must change it. And we have not reached that turning point yet where we have been able to get those higher level executives to understand that we do have allies in men who are drivers themselves too, but we need the leadership from the top to kind of stop trying to stuff it down and say, you all got a seat at the table, but please behave yourselves while you're here and don't talk about anything controversial. So we're still trying to fight our way to that point so that we could get then more companies on board, because it just takes that first one to take the leap of faith, and then the others, I believe, will follow and want to join into a bigger campaign.
Okay. Chantal, I see you nodding.
I'm doing so much nodding. I, like Karen and like Desiree, feel really strongly about this worker-led component of this issue, because, as an actor, everyone is just, really just wanting the next job. I mean, they're working other jobs to support this dream and this career, and so much is at stake at every given opportunity to work. And so, what I've seen and what I've experienced is this acknowledgement that this isn't a singular person's experience. This is a systemic problem, and that one that was possibly not thoroughly understood by the employers, who have the duty of care to keep us safe and providing a safe workspace, and one in which we can experience dignity in the workplace. And so this moment has been about acknowledging the systemic problems. And with that has brought unions and guilds and organizations to the table to create avenues where people can share their experiences in a safe way, provide ideas and forums where people can discuss a new way forward. And it was actually in this work that I was doing with SAG-AFTRA that I discovered the position of intimacy coordination for film and television. So when performers are doing their most vulnerable work, they're provided with a person such as myself to advocate and to, facilitate communication between employer and performer. And that's just one of the ways that we can provide a safer framework for workers to go to work and feel more at ease and free and have a positive experience, because we're all supposed to be following our bliss and doing our work and working hard, and it should not cost us the price that it has for so many of us. For myself, I was an actor in film and television, and that first experience that I had was the first film I worked on. I immediately shifted away from film and television and did commercials. And so you've seen the success that I had in commercials. People go, well, why not film and television? And I'm like, well, the price is too high, to work in film and television at that time. And so I'm here, and, creating, all these different ways and opportunities for us to come together as workers to facilitate that communication between employer and workers, so that we can find the best way and the most efficient way to create sustainable and efficient frameworks for safer workspaces.
So, Veronica, help me drill down a little bit on the practicalities of doing this. I mean, how did you actually get workers to participate and do this with you?
Bueno, el apoyo a un trabajador o una trabajadora que decide hablar y decir lo que le pasó, ¿verdad? Es algo lo más importante, ¿verdad? Porque es fácil, para muchas personas, no quiero decir que es fácil, ¿no? Lo que está pasando, pero cuando decidimos romper el silencio, cuando decidimos decir, me pasó esto, ¿verdad? Pensamos que esa es la parte más difícil, el poder hablar. Pero la parte más difícil viene después, cuando somos señaladas, cuando nos empiezan a decir, pues tú te ofreciste, tú tuviste la culpa, ¿por qué estás trabajando ahí? Y cosas así. Entonces, ¿cómo apoyamos a estas mujeres que lograron decir lo que estaba pasando y que muchas veces la misma familia está rechazándola, pensando que somos nosotras las culpables, las que provocamos o las que somos las que hacemos el problema, ¿verdad? Nosotros hicimos un modelo de promotoras, un modelo de prevención de acoso sexual, donde no solo lo presentamos a los empleadores y pedimos a los empleadores que lo hagan, sino que nosotros fuimos más allá. Nosotros dijimos, hagámoslo ley. Vamos, peleemos por una ley que obligue a los empleadores a dar un entrenamiento de prevención de acoso sexual a todos los trabajadores de limpieza, ¿verdad? Entonces, logramos esa ley donde le está diciendo a un empleador que no va a obtener su licencia de trabajo si no ha entrenado a todos sus trabajadores. Entonces, esa es la clave que nosotros encontramos, donde vamos a obligar a estos empleadores a que tomen cartas en ese asunto, ¿no? Si esperamos que ellos estén creando lugares saludables, lugares libres de acoso dentro del lugar de trabajo, no lo van a hacer, ¿verdad? Entonces, tenemos que obligarlos. Ahora, los trabajadores se sienten ahora respaldados por una ley, diciendo, es la ley la que te obliga a ti como empleador cuidar o tener un lugar seguro para mí en el trabajo. Y ese respaldo los trabajadores lo ven muy positivo y dicen, wow, o sea, es la ley protegiéndome. No es nada más el sindicato, que los sindicatos, claro, tienen poder, pero el sindicato también ayudó para crear esta ley y poderle decir a los empleadores que deberíamos de crear espacios donde esté libre de acoso, libre de abuso sexual, libre de conductas abusivas, ¿verdad? Entonces, los trabajadores ahora quieren ser parte de este programa, quieren ser parte de la solución. Están ahora aprendiendo a cómo prevenir el acoso. No solo responder cuando el acoso ya pasó o cuando una violación ha pasado, sino cómo vamos a prevenir eso y cómo estamos cambiando, ¿verdad? Muchas mentes en los lugares de trabajo diciéndoles, Queremos lugares seguros y libres de acoso. Y todos somos parte de la solución. No lo veamos como que el empleador nos va a venir a solucionar. Somos nosotros mismos los que tenemos que decir qué es lo que está bien en el trabajo y lo que no está bien en el trabajo. Y cuando nos toman en cuenta nuestra voz, cuando nosotros podemos decir, esta es la solución de lo que está pasando, ¿verdad? Entonces ahí es donde sí sentimos que estamos trabajando tanto empleadores como parte del gobierno, como también nosotros como trabajadores, que somos los que estamos siendo afectados en este problema.
So actually, there's one aspect of your program that's really interesting, the promoters program. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Veronica?
Sí, el programa de promotoras consiste en mujeres que puede ser que sufrieron acoso sexual, también hay mujeres que no lo han sufrido, pero ven lo que pasaron, a lo mejor una familiar, una compañera de trabajo, ¿verdad? Y entonces empezamos a educarlas con algo básico. Primero es que ellas conozcan qué es el acoso sexual. Muchas de nuestras compañeras no saben que están sufriendo acoso, no saben reconocer esa parte, piensan que eso pasa o que es normal. Entonces, el poder enseñar eso básico a una mujer y decirle, eso que te está pasando es acoso, ahí es donde empieza esa base, ¿verdad? Después ellas empiezan a aprender sobre sus derechos, las cosas que necesitan saber para protegerse, ¿verdad? Dónde denunciar, qué hacer en caso de un acoso, dónde poder hacer un reporte, ¿verdad? Y ese modelo también empodera a la mujer porque puede sanar. Nosotros decimos que sanamos también a través del activismo. Nosotros podemos sanar hablando del problema, pero también diciéndole a otra persona, tú tienes derecho, yo soy janitor como tú y he pasado por lo mismo, ¿verdad? Entonces, creamos todo un currículo donde los mismos janitor escribieron se puede decir un programa, un tema, donde estamos recibiendo qué es el acoso, cuál es el impacto que está en la industria, cuál es el impacto que crea una persona que ha sufrido acoso sexual, ¿verdad? Y hablamos sobre leyes, hablamos sobre lo que el patrón o el empleador tendría que hacer. Al final tenemos una graduación de estas mujeres donde aprendieron todo eso y el objetivo final es que estas mismas mujeres van a ir a los lugares de trabajo a dar ese entrenamiento a sus demás compañeros. Son mujeres que se han preparado con todos estos temas y donde están diciendo, yo soy experta en este tema y ahora vengo aquí a este lugar de trabajo a decirte a ti tus derechos y que no debe estar pasando en el trabajo. Entonces, es empoderando a la mujer o a cualquier persona, ¿no? Con estudio, con saber cuáles son sus derechos, pero también ir a ese lugar de trabajo, hablar con sus compañeros y decirle de la prevención del acoso sexual, ¿verdad? También sabemos de que mucha de la comunidad LGBTQ que está en estos trabajos sufre el doble de acoso, ¿verdad? Eso es, estadísticamente, ellos muchas veces podemos decir, ¿cómo va a sufrir acoso sexual alguien de una orientación sexual diferente? Es mentira, lo sufren y al doble. Ellos son más atacados en nuestra industria de la limpieza y ellos también son parte de este programa de promotoras, ¿verdad? Incluso tenemos hombres que han decidido dar ese paso y decir, si yo soy parte de ese problema, también quiero ser parte de la solución. Y eso nos ayuda mucho a que hombres también se están involucrando y que ellos quieran cambiar esa cultura tóxica que existe dentro de la limpieza.
So thank you, Veronica, for raising the issue of inclusivity. I'd love for the rest of you all to weigh in on that. How do we ensure that these programs are inclusive? What are some of the techniques that the rest of you have done to make that happen? And forgive me for dwelling on practicalities, but I feel like so much here can be replicated by others. So I'd also love to hear what you think is a core element of your own training. So let me start with Desiree.
Well, we don't have anything as formal as what Veronica outlined. It's much more informal, but it is very important that you listen. And I listen to a lot of women that call me, and I have been sexually assaulted before I entered trucking, and I know how important it was for me to tell somebody without them, you know, Monday morning quarterbacking the incident. It does help people to just tell what happened. And so I listen to a lot of women, and we work with a lot of informal truck driver groups. And because we're over the road truck drivers, we don't go back to the same place every day. We might not be in the same place for months at a time. So social media, Facebook, other social networking sites are ways to form communities. So there's LGBTQ truck drivers, and there's African American women truck drivers, and there's all these different groups. And somewhere in the middle, we meet each other and we talk. So we have been able to support and learn about other groups, the problems. A lot of the women, as Veronica said, they don't even know they have rights. They don't know that it's illegal. They don't know who to tell. And we have a jurisdiction problem as well, because the company could be in one state, one driver lives in another state, the person that did it to them is from another state, and then the actual incident took place in a fourth state, and the law enforcement doesn't even want to deal with it. They're like, why are you here? And why are you on a truck with somebody you barely know? And so we have a big hurdle to get over with a lot of bystander intervention and education to the public that this happens in different states and different communities between people that barely know each other, and a little bit like an acquaintance rate, but you even met them because the employer introduced you to them.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So Karen, let me turn to you. First, the inclusion issue. How do you make sure that everybody is accounted for? And second, what would you see as an absolutely core element of training?
Well, I think you have to have people at the table. You have to be communicating with all of the groups of people. There has to be stories, but it's really also about relationships, right? It's a lot harder to harass somebody that you have a relationship with, that you know the names of their kids, that you understand why they're there. And it's harder to target somebody when there's relationships amongst the people. So encouraging that is important. But what I would say about the training is, first and foremost, best practices show that 1-2 hour sexual harassment training is not going to change anything. And I think we all can conclude that we've been doing that for, I don't know how many hundreds of years. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work. Let's stop calling it anti-harassment training or sexual harassment training, because that also is just putting people at the defensive before they even start. I think it's important to have it implemented in different areas of the work site. So we're in construction, right? Like Desiree, we don't work with the same people every day. There might be this group on the site today and a whole nother group on the site tomorrow. So you have to think of, in the realm of that industry, where can you implement and talk about these subjects that are already happening in your daily work? So worker orientation, job box talks, toolbox talks, things are already happening. How do we talk about this? And you have to be intentional about talking about it all the time. You can't just do it for a month. You can't do it. It has to be part of the culture, and it has to be included. One and done is not going to work. And I think it's critical and key that we teach people to advocate for themselves. We don't teach that in high school. I think it's even more important than financial education, which we still don't teach in most high schools. But advocacy is really important, because they don't necessarily know their rights. They don't know how to advocate for themselves. And then if they get to the point where they do need to take things further, they don't know how to do that either. So I think that advocacy piece and bystander intervention, which was mentioned, are also critical components. So sorry, not just one, but several.
That's okay. The more, the merrier. I actually want to follow up on one of the things that you said, this idea of not calling it, sexual harassment training. Any thoughts on what it ought to be?
So we, in our area, it's respectful workplace, acceptable work site. It's framed in the positive work culture that we're trying to create.
Positive work culture. That's so interesting to me because that brings up this idea of culture. What kind of culture do you want to create as, in a workplace, and how do you change culture? So that's going to be the next question that I'm going to ask after I ask Chantal to weigh in on the inclusion issue and the one key element of training.
Thank you. I mean, it's been covered here in this conversation. Desiree mentioned the loopholes of not being in the same place, the jurisdiction loopholes that make it harder to report or discuss, efficient frameworks. It happens a lot with performers as well. And when that started happening, the calls were coming in. So people were talking and telling and reporting their experiences. The union and performers, we all felt that it was important that we get legislative change on that issue. And so I testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee in California to change and add on to what is considered an employer here in California. So whereas it used to be the person, Bill that signs the check in Chicago in a tiny office that will never meet anyone ever, was technically the employer. Now it was expanded in 2019 to include anyone who can affect your career, the casting director, the producer, the director. It's just everyone that can affect a person's career, because it was in that loophole that we found the most harm was happening to performers. And we found that out because we created and expanded the hotline at the union, because when I came forward, I said 500 women came forward to me, or 400 women came forward to me. Well, they inundated and broke the system at the union with how many calls came in to the union. So we, created a safe space for people to, safely report their issues. The key element for this education component is, I think, reaching out to other workers, because at the end of the day, we need to explain what the issue is, what we've now acknowledged is the issue. We need to educate people through seminars and guidebooks and podcasts and live streams and every possible way to explain to people, as Veronica said, what is harassment, defining consent, because consent has been something that people don't quite understand, is something that is, as described through Planned Parenthood, is it's informative. Like, you have to be informed to give consent. You have to be, it's reversible. It has to be enthusiastic. It can't just be, you're terrified and say yes. Like, there needs to be an acknowledgement of your understanding of the situation in order for you to provide consent. And so with that, we realize there are institutional problems here. And myself as an intimacy coordinator, I look to create and go further with at-risk workers, which is the LGBTQIA plus community, people of different ethnicities, people where English might not be their first language, on a set where it's the first language. And so these groups of people are at risk. And so that is just, that's just the information that we know. And so for myself as an intimacy coordinator, and for the union who's representing, 180,000 members, looking at that and creating and advocating for a space that includes and looks out for those groups of people that are at risk, it makes it more efficient for us to advocate for a safer workspace for them. Is you have to recognize and acknowledge that there's a problem in order to provide the adequate support.
So let me go to that cultural question. So we have a culture that does normalize violence and sexual violence, and I don't think it's something that's easily changed. What thoughts do you have on how to get at the root of this problem? Veronica, is that something you want to address?
Sí, definitivamente con la educación, ¿verdad? Pero cuando hablamos no solo con las víctimas, sino que hablamos, y lo voy a referir a la industria de la limpieza y lo que nosotros hemos visto, ¿verdad? Cuando estamos dando información, este tipo de información del acoso sexual y las leyes y cómo afecta y todo eso, estamos hablando con las víctimas diciéndole, si a ti te ha pasado, tú tienes derecho a reportarlo, ¿verdad? Pero también estamos hablando con el victimario, diciéndole, si tú sigues haciendo eso, es contra la ley y pueden haber consecuencias para ti. Puedes perder el trabajo, puedes ir hasta la cárcel. Entonces, aquí es donde estamos de raíz, diciéndole a las dos personas, tú tienes derecho a reportar, tú tienes derecho a que no te pase, tú tienes derecho a trabajar en un lugar seguro. Pero también le estamos diciendo a esa persona que está cometiendo el acoso, no lo hagas porque vas a perder tu trabajo, no lo hagas porque te vas a enfrentar a la ley. Muchas veces cuando no se le advierte a una persona cuál es la consecuencia de sus acciones, lo sigue haciendo. Entonces, cuando los exponemos a estas personas y les decimos, o cambias, ¿verdad? O te vas a quedar sin trabajo, porque estamos protegidas las personas que estamos sufriendo acoso. Entonces, ahí es donde empezamos a cambiar esa cultura. Ahí es donde una persona, y hemos visto casos de que cuando les estamos hablando de cómo le afecta a una persona el acoso, cómo no solo afecta en el trabajo, sino que también le afecta en su hogar, con su familia, si está casada, con su esposo, su esposa, lo que sea, cómo afecta emocionalmente, físicamente. Cuando los exponemos a eso, esas personas empiezan a hacer conciencia y decir, wow, he hecho esto tantas veces que no me había dado cuenta lo mal que se puede sentir otra persona. Nosotros creemos que podemos cambiar y es a lo que estamos apostando, que esta cultura puede cambiar, porque hay muchas personas que cometen este tipo de abuso, y no quiero decir que todas, porque muchos son conscientes de lo que hacen, pero muchas personas vienen de una cultura, y lo hemos mencionado mucho, que piensan que es muy normal y no piensan que hay consecuencias acerca de eso. Pero cuando los exponemos a estas consecuencias es donde ellos dicen, oh, de verdad, tengo necesidad también yo de trabajar, ¿verdad? Y si lo sigo haciendo, pues me van a correr. Entonces, cuando estamos haciendo eso, también estamos diciéndoles, tú tienes hijas, hermanas, familia, mujeres que a lo mejor han pasado por eso y no te lo han dicho porque ven que tú también cometes ese tipo de abuso. Y cuando empiezan a hacer conciencia de que hay personas en su familia que han sufrido este tipo de acoso, también los llevamos a esa conciencia de decir, ¿qué estás haciendo tú también? ¿Tú eres parte del problema o quieres ser parte de la solución para que no siga pasando? Otra de las cosas es que muchas de esas personas a las que llevamos esta información tienen hijos y ahí es donde empezamos a educar. Por ejemplo, yo tengo una niña y un niño de 18 años y yo le digo a mi hijo, hey, si una mujer te dice que no, es no y respétala. ¿Ok? Y a mi hija le digo, tú tienes derecho a decir que no cuando tú quieras, porque nadie tiene derecho a violentar tu cuerpo, nadie tiene derecho a obligarte a hacer algo que no quieres. Entonces yo estoy educando a las dos partes, diciéndole a mi hijo tienes que respetar a la mujer, tienes que respetar. Si alguien te dice que no, es no. Y a mi hija decirle, tú tienes derecho a decir que no. Entonces también ahí, y yo sé que mencionaron igual que no va a ser un cambio de la noche a la mañana, pero vamos sembrando esas semillas, vamos sembrando en esa mente, diciéndole las cosas que puede y no puede hacer en el lugar de trabajo, ¿verdad? Y cómo estas personas van tomando esta información y la van transformando y muchas han cambiado. Nosotros hemos visto el cambio en muchas personas que antes se quedaban calladas y ahora lo pueden decir, personas que antes cometían este tipo de abuso y ahora se detienen y piensan y dicen, no, no lo puedo hacer, no puedo seguir siendo parte del problema. Y eso nos ha ayudado mucho a nosotros.
Okay, does anyone else want to chime in here?
I do.
I'm right after you. You can all chime in all at once. All right.
I read a case 2 days ago before this, a company. And so we don't have a lot of unions in trucking. They are not strong in our industry. And we're regulated by a federal agency that says they can't do anything unless Congress tells them to do something. So, and we have a dysfunctional Congress. So we are just like not able to get anything immediately done. So this case comes to me, and this individual has sexually assaulted this young lady. And it turns out he's been rehired by this same company 3 or 4 times. 3 times as an employee and 2 times as an independent contractor. And in his file, he sexually assaulted someone else. And it was in his file from a senior level HR person, yet they still put him on a truck and it said, don't let him drive with women, yet they let him drive with women. And they're his defense attorneys because she's suing him and the company. And he also had a kidnapping on his background check. So we have so many problems in our industry. That's not even the end of it. When he leaves this place all the time and comes back to work, he goes to other training companies. So to me, what I'm seeing is a serial rapist that knows that he can get a student here, a student there, and then go back to the first company that he knows that he can get rehired at a year later, and that he will be able to continue this. So for us, I'd really like to see some legislation, maybe a national database to identify these individuals that are taking advantage of all of the holes in our system that let them sort of just vanish back into the population to hurt someone else. I have encountered some men in some of these cases that did not know that this conduct was illegal, that coercing someone into sex is how they have sex. But there's also some that clearly know how broken trucking is, and that you can drive around this United States of America anonymously and be in a lot of different states in one day and go fly under the radar.
Okay. All right. Everybody was all fired up here. So, okay. Aaron, next.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I think that I'm a little more ruthless than Veronica. I think there has to be casualties. Speaking to what Desiree said, that we can no longer have it be an excuse that, oh, that's just Bob, that's the way he is, or moving the victim is the answer to the problem. Those types of things have to go away, and there has to be casualties. People have to get fired. There has to be consequences. You get the behavior you tolerate. You get the behavior you tolerate. If you tolerate any of this behavior in your work site, at home, in your relationships, you will continue to get that behavior. You get what you tolerate. So there has to be casualties. There has to be more people coming forward. There's probably going to have to be some more lawsuits, but somebody's got to lose. Well, I should say the people who are perpetrating these situations have to lose and see that their paycheck could go away if they don't change that behavior before it's going to stop.
Okay. Chantal?
That's great. I mean, Veronica said something about normalizing, the change. And I feel like that's what culture has done, right? The culture has been normalized around harm. Someone harms someone, and then the other person reports. There are either results that harm the victim coming forward, or a slap on the wrist that teaches the employer or the person in a position of power that does the harming to do it differently, get better at it, skirt the consequences. And so that has been the culture to date. And what we've been seeing since I've been seeing in our industry is that we now have to normalize this shift in culture. So talking to employers as workers, telling them that this is not about sex, that this is about power. And that has been a light bulb moment for a lot of employers, because they're just thinking, I don't want to get involved with the sex lives of my employees, and it's not about sex, it's about power. And so as soon as you normalize that conversation with employers, you're telling them in a language that they understand, which is a different language than the one that you're going to want to educate your workers on. But to educate the employer, you're saying, this is costing you lawsuits, hiccups in production, people who are refusing to go to work or come out of their trailers, or refusing to work with their co-stars, and all of these issues that are coming forward in the film industry. We are now normalizing that conversation with the employer, saying, there's a communication breakdown here. There's a power structure that's making consent harder to advocate for. If the question is, are you comfortable with this, from the employer, and the employee going, yeah, sure, anything that you want, because you have firing capabilities. So what you want is someone, either a union, legislation, an intimacy coordinator. Just, you can't have that in the trucking industry. There's not like a buddy system where you're sitting in the middle and just going, everyone, listening to each other. So there are structural differences that are going to happen across the industries worldwide. But in the ones where we are isolated, and that we can explain this culture breakdown and how it has been established for harm, and how we can say, having these solutions, be it the ones that I mentioned before, intimacy coordinators, contract changes, reinforcing legislative reform, all of these things really teach employers how to do things differently. And it tells the workers, this is how I can adequately provide consent, is by everyone recognizing that the power is the issue and not sex. Sex is the manner in which workers are harmed and debased, and just made to feel like their value is intrinsically connected to their bodies, and that is not what workers have to offer. As Karen said, the industry absolutely needs these valuable construction workers. We absolutely need people bringing things and goods from one place to another. And Veronica, like, the industry is just so powerful and so necessary that the culture needs to shift in a place of normalizing care, mental health resources, reporting mechanisms that allow for a fluid exchange of ideas with regards to change. Because with every voice that comes forward, and this is why it is worker-led, we learn of a way that we can strengthen the infrastructure to create a better culture. So thank you for asking that, Donna. I appreciate that.
Great. Well, power, it's such an interesting concept here. And I think we've been talking a lot about sexual violence, but there are other types of workplace violence, other types of sort of power plays. And the other thing that we see a lot of is trainings that are sort of gender-based, maybe focused on women. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether we need to be sort of broadening that lens. Anybody? Any takers on that one?
I mean, I just spoke, but I will say that, again, highlighting the power component in this really, and the discussion on consent allows for groups of people to understand that this is beyond just like the male female relationship, and having them understand the like nuance of interpersonal relationships in the workspace. What is professional, what is appropriate, what is empowering, and what is inducing shame and fear and discomfort in the workplace. But yeah, I'll let someone else take that from there, but that's my initial thoughts on that.
I would say that we in our industry, we do have a large LGBTQIA population of drivers that is just now finding their footing to come and start talking about what's going on with them. And we do have same gender assaults that come to our attention. And one of the things that the establishment industry is trying to get right now is a same gender training exemption. So their solution is to roll back the clock and segregate us. And that is somehow going to solve the rape problem without recognizing that we do have same gender assaults. And it's not just trainer student, it can be student trainer. We've had murders between team drivers that are same gender. And so we really just have to look at the whole workplace culture. This is workplace violence, and it is gotten completely out of control, where you have this whole sector that thinks if we just hire more women, this problem will be solved. And that's just not the case. And so we do need to look at this on a broader level.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, in the construction industry, the number one reason all people leave, whether you're a white male or female LGBTQ person of color, is the culture of the industry. So even white males are leaving because of the culture of the industry. People leave cultures, people leave managers. This is about generational differences. I mean, the generational differences, what Gen Z is going to accept on the work site is completely different than what Gen Xers accepted on the work site. So it's about learning about bias, learning about microaggressions, learning about the behavior and how it impacts other people. And other people can be people with disabilities, different sexual identities, different gender identities. There's age. There's a whole realm of why people are discriminated against. So I agree. It has to be, we have to check our bias, and that bias is against a lot of different things, not just against women.
So I'm about to turn to Veronica and ask her what trauma-informed peer education and awareness on gender-based violence and harassment looks like. But before I do, I'm just going to remind our audience that we are a few minutes away, I think maybe 2 or 3 minutes away from our question and answer period, where we take some questions from you, our audience. So please, if you've got a question, add it to the Q&A function on your screen, and I will ask as many questions as time permits. So Veronica, tell me a little bit about what trauma-informed peer education and awareness should look like.
Ok, sí, y eso es algo que de repente es muy difícil, ¿no? Aprender cómo somos capaces de entender que una persona viene con traumas desde su niñez y que va a tener diferentes reacciones y cómo nosotros podemos ayudar a esas personas, ¿no? O por lo menos escucharlas y comprenderlas. Pero algo que de lo anterior que estaba mencionando, nosotros en el currículum tenemos ejemplos de cómo una persona de la comunidad LGBTQ también sufre acoso. Entonces, eso está integrado ya para nosotros en ese currículum, donde estamos enseñando que no solo la mujer está recibiendo el acoso, sino que también puede ser a una persona, ¿verdad? Que está en esto. Y es lo que nosotros aprendemos. También cómo el trauma informado para nosotros nos ha ayudado a entender más a las personas por qué soportan a veces este tipo de acoso. Y es porque a lo mejor lo vivieron en sus hogares, ¿verdad? Entonces es tan importante poder ser empáticos con estas personas que han sufrido el acoso, ¿verdad? No es solo decir, oh, es que sufrió una violación y por eso se comporta así. No, hay diferentes reacciones de estas personas. Puede ser que una persona reaccione enojada, ¿verdad? Puede ser que una persona se encierra en sí misma y no quiere decir nada, pero es donde nosotros cuando estamos aprendiendo de que es importante saber que todas las personas venimos con traumas de nuestra niñez, de nuestro hogar, ¿verdad? Y no juzgarlas, porque muchas veces tendemos a juzgar nada más a una persona porque se deja. Muchas veces decimos, se dejó hacer eso porque es tonta y no quiere decir nada. No, a lo mejor algo ocurrió en su vida y por eso está soportando el acoso. Por eso a lo mejor no puede hablar. Poder tener esa empatía, ¿verdad? Hacia las personas que están sufriendo el acoso y comprenderlas y entenderlas, no juzgarlas. Eso nos ayuda mucho el trauma informado a nosotros.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we are now open to questions from our audience. And of course, if you would like to use the Q&A function, it's down at the bottom of your screen. So our first question, several of you are in male-dominated fields. There's some interest in learning, how do you get allies? How do you get people to participate with you who may not be directly affected by this? Karen?
So WorkSafe BC in Canada did something very unique because they wanted to engage the white males to be the allies and actually teach this there. And so they worked with the football team there to have them bought in and come do the training for them. So it brought the white males in because they wanted to meet these, football players. And that then started the conversation where they started to see that behavior and talk about this and created a lot of allies. So anytime you can get white males to be speaking up on this issue, I think it's critical. If they can be trainers, if they can be at the forefront of the message, it's proven that if a white male says something, everybody listens more. And so that's helpful to have them. So engaging them, again, we do it based on, if it's the owner of the company, how is this going to make you more money? This isn't about social justice. This is about whatever their values are, whatever they want to do, and focusing on that will help them buy into it. If there's something in it for them, they will be more willing to buy into it.
Okay. Desiree, do you want to add to that at all?
Oh, sí, yo quiero.
I agree with what Karen says. I feel like in trucking, I've met a lot of men in upper management that are open to doing something, but they're sort of waiting for the women to get it together. And because we have a lot of women in these executive areas that are really still not ready, comfortable to talk about this, trying to get the workers and these men in power, because they don't know where to start, and so that for me, I feel like that's what's going to happen in trucking, is finding some of those white male allies that are willing to listen to the workers And then these other people that have been hesitant to like step up and be candid are going to fall in line because they're followers.
Okay, so I think many folks who may be watching may wonder how you actually get something like this started. What's the first step you could take in your own workplace to raise awareness and actually bring change? And I'm going to go first to Veronica and then to Chantal.
Pues primero es identificar el problema, ¿verdad? Cuando identificamos el problema, entonces empezamos a ver qué vamos a solucionar. Pero identificamos el problema con historias. Empezamos esas conversaciones con compañeros de trabajo diciendo, ¿te ha pasado lo mismo? ¿O cómo te sentiste cuando te pasó? Cuando empezamos a hablar del problema, cuando empezamos a exponerlo, cuando empezamos a decir, eso me incomodó, eso no me gustó, esto quisiera que cambiara, entonces ahí empezamos a buscar soluciones. Entonces creo ahí es donde empezamos. Ser parte del problema muchas veces es más fácil que ser parte de la solución, ¿verdad? Pero es donde estamos hablando. Este cambio de cultura debe existir en la industria. Ya basta de tanto abuso. Creo que todos estamos cansados de eso. Así que si seguimos siendo parte del problema, no vamos a llegar a nada y vamos a seguir manteniendo esos trabajos donde yo voy a tener miedo de ir a trabajar porque voy a sentir miedo al acoso. Pero ¿cómo podemos llegar a las soluciones? ¿Cómo alguien se va a sentir mejor en su trabajo? Como alguien lo estaba mencionando, que si alguien que se siente acosado, muchas veces baja su productividad, no quiere seguir trabajando, va a llamar más tiempo enferma. El empleador va a empezar a perder también, va a empezar a sentir en su bolsillo que ya no hay ganancias porque un trabajador ya no es productivo. Entonces, ¿cómo trabajamos en conjunto? ¿Cómo también a esa persona le afecta que pase el acoso dentro del lugar de trabajo? ¿Y cómo lo hacemos parte de la solución? ¿Verdad? Escuchando la voz de los trabajadores, qué soluciones para los trabajadores es necesario. A veces creemos que recursos humanos, la oficina de recursos humanos es la que nos va a solucionar todo, pero ellos ni siquiera saben lo que está pasando dentro del lugar de trabajo. Así que ellos no pueden dar la solución. Son los mismos trabajadores los que dicen qué es lo que está pasando y qué lo solucionaría. Eso es lo importante, centrar la solución en los trabajadores, no en alguien que a lo mejor tiene un título, que a lo mejor alguien estudió, pero que no sabe en realidad lo que está pasando de lo que está viviendo un trabajador de limpieza, lo que está viviendo alguien que está en un troque, lo que está viviendo alguien que está ahí día a día en la construcción, ¿verdad? Una actriz que a lo mejor tiene que acceder a cosas porque necesita el trabajo. No lo saben. Nosotros los trabajadores somos los que lo sabemos y tienen que escuchar la voz de nosotros.
Hey, thank you. Chantal.
Well, Donna, I'm not going to just reiterate everything Veronica just said, but that was a really powerful, circuit of events, so it is exactly what happened at SAG-AFTRA, where when people started speaking, they were calling into a regular contracts hotline. So, if you have a hard time, like, what happens if I didn't have breakfast, or what happens if my lunch was only half an hour? That was the call they were getting like once or twice a week. They were inundated with dozens of calls every day talking about what had happened to them in months, years, decades before. And so immediately that highlighted the need for the proper professional to answer that call, to provide safe, professional resources for someone disclosing to them. You don't want some Janine in accounting to be, or contracts to be taking a call as sensitive as a disclosure. So immediately the union, created a special hotline to call that was met with an outsourced company that had professionals that could take that call and provide adequate support and resources and next steps steps for a person calling, and that happened within a matter of weeks. And it got better and better as as the need became clear. So as Veronica acknowledging the issue, pinpointing the weaknesses in the existing culture and the existing infrastructure, and how do we make necessary critical shifts in order to not only reach survivors, because this isn't a survivors-led change, this is a worker-led change. And so people who were bystanders that were like, you know what, I saw what happened to so-and-so, and that wasn't right. And they called because they suffered a trauma experiencing someone else's trauma. Do you understand? So there was an industry in pain, and so after realizing with all of those calls what the issue was, then it was, well, where in our contract can we strengthen this? Where in our communities, where in organizations, what in education can we create to let people know that this is happening? And the education component of it needed to be aggressive. We needed podcasts that every week highlight ways that we can reach people where their understanding really they get that light bulb moment. We need the light bulb moment for people. It is the starting point for any successful moves moving forward. And I personally really wanted my coming forward to be about the future. Yes, this is the ABCs of what happened, but the why is more interesting to me, and the how, and the future. That was the really compelling part of coming forward for me. It's like, and so when you're talking to employers about the problem that that we're facing, is how do we move forward? Like, yes, you may not have been aware. You don't have to get defensive. You may not have been aware of it, may not have been aware of the scope of the problem. You may not have been aware of the ways in which you were complicit. You may not have been aware of, who it was affecting and how it was affecting the productivity in your business. All of these things you may not have been aware of, but we're not interested in that. I'm really interested in how I can provide with you a better way forward. And so if we can have this conversation amongst workers globally, I think this is the way forward. And and that's why I really appreciate all of you here today and having this conversation.
Well, that is a wonderful note on which to wrap up, looking toward the future and how much more we can do. There's clearly a larger discussion that we could continue to have here. This has been absolutely fascinating, and I really appreciate all of you spending time with us. Before we go, I'd love to turn this over to Wendy Chun-Hoon, who will give us a little summary and wrap us up for the day. So thank you all so much for your time.
I also want to add my thanks. This has been an incredible conversation. I'm just so appreciative for how each of you shared and across vastly different industries and types of work that you represent, from entertainment to trucking. Just maybe, as you said in the end, Chantal, like, this is about the future. And just reflecting back to parts of the conversation, Chidi, you mentioned in the beginning, this understanding globally, right? That more than 1 in 5 workers experience at least one form of violence and harassment at work. That's 740 million people worldwide. When we think about in the United States, anywhere from 25 to 85% of women reporting having experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. So we know also that most cases of sexual harassment at work are going unreported. So just holding for a second that these numbers are horrific, unacceptable, and really ultimately underscore the urgent need for concerted action. And then to have this whole conversation about worker-driven education and awareness initiatives, and just knowing how key they are to our collective action. Just hearing from each of you, this whole team of bold leaders, and again, across the range of your work experiences, that developing and implementing effective and peer-driven and ongoing education and awareness programs actually can and has increased awareness and understanding about what gender-based violence and harassment is, and is actually having traction in improving both the prevention and response. Thinking about strategies that are about direct input from workers alongside employer commitment and support, and just how critical all of these things are to overall effectiveness. Chantel, the emphasis you put on worker-led and trauma-informed education and survivor-centered resources, including, as you said, with your union and guild, noting the role that employers have in facilitating safe workplaces free from retaliation. These are all the core components of the Convention 190 framework. And I'm just remembering back this simple and very provocative shift that you named about how do we actually shift to a workplace culture that normalizes care instead of reinforcing, a dominant culture of power over, right? Veronica, you said this so many times, as did all of you, that the solution is within us, within workers, us as workers, and that we can absolutely combat the toxic culture that allows perpetrators to continue to inflict harm. You said, education has to be for all, not just for potential victims, but for potential perpetrators and bystanders. And that kind of worker-driven approach to education and training is, again, exactly what the principles of Convention 190 promote, and that it's not at odds with employers. It's the very poignant point that you made about the power of healing through activism. Karen, thinking back to your points, you reminded us, there's no one size fits all approach to preventing and responding to gender-based violence. Despite similarities, there are unique risk factors in our different jobs: isolation, night work, the difference between transportation, entertainment, and really thinking through what are the appropriate measures for our different occupations or work arrangements? What is our different level of exposure to violence and harassment? Where is it more likely? And really thinking about and calling out different strategies to work for those different situations. Desiree, you brought up, education and awareness needs to go beyond those that are physically present in the workplace and expand to, for example, you said law enforcement as a potential partner. And this is also another international good practice that comes through in the Convention 190 principles, really thinking about gender responsive guidelines and trainings that assist everybody from judges to labor inspectors, police officers, anybody in that world of work. And really speaks to the point that we're of why we're here today, to unite together to really make progress on ending gender-based violence. So I just love what each of you brought, the spirit that each of you brought about change is possible. Some of you have witnessed it, as you said, through new laws that you've been a part of changing, union contracts, whatever form that takes. But you have held on to this vision despite, what are often uphill battles throughout your efforts. So I am just here to say thank you, and that the United States Department of Labor and the Women's Bureau is really eager to keep collaborating with you all, with the ILO, to really support and elevate exactly the kind of peer-to-peer learning that you each talked about today. So important to build relationships, to be in movement with each other, to continue to unite, to end gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work, and with workers' voices at the forefront. So thank you again so much. Really important to be together during these 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you to everyone for joining us, and a special thanks to the International Labor Organization Office for the USA and Canada, in collaboration with the US Department of Labor's Women's Bureau, and all of our panelists here for sharing their powerful stories. And I urge you to look to the landing page for more resources. And there have been some great things in the chat today as well. So thanks to our audience and to all of you for sharing with us. Have a great afternoon.